There was once a land in Europe where the streets were lit at night, while the rest of the continent lay in darkness. A land with running water in its homes, libraries holding hundreds of thousands of books, and cities so beautiful that travelers wept when they saw them. That land was ruled by Muslims for nearly 8 centuries. It was called Al-Andalus, and today it is gone. Not a single Muslim kingdom remains where once there were hundreds of mosques, palaces, and universities. Their descendants were hunted, forced to convert, and finally driven into the sea. How did a civilization rise so high and then vanish so completely? What did they build, and what destroyed them? And most hauntingly of all, is there a warning buried in these ruins meant for us? This is the complete story of Al-Andalus. Stay with me until the end. The year is 711. Europe is sunk in what many historians once called the Dark Ages. The great Roman order has collapsed. Across the continent, kingdoms are small, roads are crumbling, and learning survives only in scattered monasteries. And on the far southwestern edge of Europe, on the Iberian Peninsula, the land we now call Spain and Portugal, a Christian Visigothic kingdom rules. But it is rotting from within. The Visigothic king is named Roderick, and his throne is not secure. He has seized power in a way that many nobles consider illegitimate. There are rival factions, there is bitterness, there is a kingdom divided against itself. Now cross the narrow strip of water to the south. On the coast of North Africa stands the frontier of the Umayyad Caliphate, the vast Islamic empire that, within roughly 80 years of the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had spread from the borders of India in the east all the way to the Atlantic shore of Morocco in the west. The governor of this North African province is Musa ibn Nusayr, and under his command is a Berber commander whose name history would never forget, Tariq ibn Ziyad. In the spring of 711, Tariq ibn Ziyad crossed the strait with an army of several thousand men. The sources traditionally say around 7,000, mostly Berbers, later reinforced. He landed near the great rock that would forever after carry a version of his name. In Arabic, it was called Jabal Tariq, the mountain of Tariq. Over the centuries, European tongues reshaped those words into a single name still on every map today: Gibraltar. Think about that. A place name spoken by hundreds of millions of people who have no idea it preserves the memory of a Berber general who landed there more than 1,300 years ago. Now I want to pause here and be honest with you, because this channel is built on truth, not legend. There is a famous story attached to Tariq ibn Ziyad. The story that when he landed, he ordered his ships to be burned so that his soldiers would have no thought of retreat, and then delivered a stirring speech. The sea is behind you, and the enemy is before you. It is one of the most dramatic images in Islamic history. But I must tell you clearly, historians consider this burning of the ship's story to be almost certainly a later legend. It does not appear in the earliest reliable accounts and grew in the retellings over the centuries. So while it is beautiful, I will not present it to you as established fact. What is established is that Tariq crossed, he committed his forces, and he fought. In July of 711, Tariq's army met King Roderick and the Visigothic host in a great battle in the south near a river, remembered by historians as the Battle of Guadalete. The details are debated by scholars and the sources are thin, but the outcome is not in doubt. The Visigothic army was shattered. King Roderick himself vanished from history, most likely killed, his body never certainly identified. And then something astonishing happened. The kingdom did not just lose a battle, it collapsed. City after city opened its gates. Some resisted, many did not. The Visigothic realm had been so divided, so resented by parts of its own population, including a heavily taxed peasantry and a persecuted Jewish community, that the invaders were often met with little unified resistance, Within a handful of years, the Muslim armies, now reinforced by Musa ibn Nusayr himself, had swept across almost the entire peninsula. By around 718, most of Iberia was under Muslim control. Let me put that in perspective. In roughly 7 years, a territory it had taken others centuries to hold fell under a new order. It was one of the most rapid conquests in medieval history. But here I must add a crucial layer of honesty, because the popular story often gets this wrong. This conquest was not a clean, bloodless, purely idealistic affair, nor was it pure devastation. It was a real military conquest with all the complexity that implies. There was fighting, there were sieges, there were treaties, and there was negotiation. In many places, the Muslim conquerors signed formal agreements with local Christian lords, allowing them to keep their lands, their religion, and their governance in exchange for tribute. One of the most famous is the treaty with a nobleman named Theodemir in the southeast, whose terms survive and show local Christians permitted to keep their churches and practice their faith. This established a pattern that would define Al-Andalus for centuries, a society where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived side by side. Christians and Jews living under Muslim rule were classified as dhimmis, protected non-Muslims who paid a special tax called the jizya, and in return were guaranteed protection of their lives, property, and freedom of worship. Now, I want to be careful and fair here, because both extremes distort the truth. Some tell you Al-Andalus was a perfect paradise of tolerance, where everyone lived in flawless harmony. Others tell you it was nothing but oppression. The honest historical reality is somewhere in between, and it changed dramatically over the 8 centuries. There were long periods of genuine coexistence and extraordinary cultural exchange. There were also periods of tension, discrimination, and even persecution. Non-Muslims had a defined but subordinate legal status. To flatten all of that into a single slogan, whether paradise or tyranny, is to lie about history. And we do not lie about history. But in these early years, one thing was undeniable. A new civilization had been planted in the soil of Europe, and it was about to grow into something the world had never seen. The conquest, however, brought a problem. Al-Andalus was now a distant province, thousands of miles from the Umayyad capital in Damascus. It was ruled by governors sent from the east, and it was plagued by infighting between Arabs and Berbers, between rival tribes, between competing factions. For decades, it teetered on the edge of chaos. And then, far away in the heart of the Islamic world, an earthquake struck that would change everything. In the year 750, a revolution swept away the Umayyad dynasty itself. A new family, the Abbasids, seized the caliphate and hunted down the Umayyad royal house, killing nearly every prince they could find in a massacre meant to erase the old dynasty forever. Nearly every prince, because one young man escaped. A grandson of a caliph, barely 20 years old, who fled the slaughter with his life and almost nothing else. He would run for years across deserts and hostile lands, hunted at every turn, watching his own brother cut down before his eyes as they tried to swim a river to safety. His name was Abd al-Rahman, and he was heading west, toward Al-Andalus. What this hunted, penniless fugitive was about to build there would echo for 700 years. But first, he had to survive. Imagine being the last of your line. Your entire family, uncles, cousins, brothers, hunted down and killed. The empire your ancestors built for a century, gone. And you, barely 20, with a price on your head, fleeing across North Africa with a single loyal servant and a younger brother. This was Abd al-Rahman. The accounts of his escape read like a thriller. Pursued by Abbasid agents, he and his brother reached a river. Soldiers on the far bank called out promises of safety. Abd al-Rahman did not trust them and kept swimming. His younger brother, exhausted and afraid, turned back toward the promise of mercy and was seized and beheaded on the riverbank as Abd al-Rahman watched, helpless from the water. He would carry that moment for the rest of his life. For years he wandered through North Africa, a fugitive prince with nothing but his name and his will. But that name still carried power. Al-Andalus was full of former Umayyad loyalists, soldiers and clients of his family who had settled there. Abd al-Rahman sent messengers ahead and they rallied to him. In 755, he crossed into Al-Andalus. In 756, he defeated the ruling governor near Cordoba and took the city. And there, in the ancient Roman and Visigothic city on the Guadalquivir River, the last surviving Umayyad prince declared himself the ruler, the emir of an independent state. It was a stunning act. The dynasty that had been butchered in the east had risen again in the west, on the far side of the known world. Abd al-Rahman the Wine ruled for over 30 years, until 788. He crushed rebellions, unified the fractious province, and laid the foundations of a state that would endure for centuries. His enemies called him many things, but even the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, it is said, called him the Falcon of the Quraysh, a grudging tribute to a young man who had escaped death and carved out a kingdom against impossible odds. And in Cordoba, Abd al-Rahman I began building something that would become one of the wonders of the world. In 785, he ordered the construction of a great mosque, the Mezquita of Cordoba. Over the following generations, it would be expanded again and again into a forest of arches, hundreds of columns of marble, jasper and granite, striped in red and white, stretching into the shadows like an endless grove of stone trees. To stand inside it, even today, is to feel a kind of awe that stops the breath. For the next century and a half, the Emirate of Cordoba grew. There were struggles, revolts and dangers, including raids from the north and the ever-present tension between Arabs, Berbers, and the growing population of native converts to Islam. But Al-Andalus was becoming rich, cultured, and increasingly sophisticated. Then came the man who would raise it to its absolute peak, Abd al-Rahman III. He came to power in 912 as a young ruler inheriting a state that was, once again, fracturing into rebellion and chaos. Rebel warlords held fortresses across the land. The authority of Cordoba had crumbled. It looked as though Al-Andalus might collapse. Over the next 2 decades, Abd al-Rahman III methodically rebuilt the state, defeated the rebels, and restored central authority. And then, in the year 929, he made a momentous declaration. He proclaimed himself Caliph. Understand the weight of this. The title of Caliph carried immense religious and political significance in the Muslim world. By taking it, Abd al-Rahman III was declaring that Cordoba was not merely a province, but the equal of the great capitals of the Islamic world, a sovereign center of the Muslim faith and civilization in its own right. The Umayyad Caliphate had been reborn in Spain. Under Abd al-Rahman III and his son Al-Hakam II, Cordoba became, by many measures, the most advanced city in Western Europe. Its population may have numbered in the hundreds of thousands at a time when most European towns held only a few thousand souls. Its streets were paved. Contemporary and later accounts describe public baths, bustling markets, and lamps lighting the main thoroughfares, a striking contrast to cities elsewhere in Europe. Just outside Cordoba, Abd al-Rahman III built a shining palace city called Madinat al-Zahra, a sprawling complex of marble, gardens, fountains and halls so magnificent that ambassadors from Christian kingdoms and even from distant Constantinople were said to be awestruck when they were received there. It was a deliberate statement of power and glory. Today it lies in excavated ruins, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a ghost of vanished splendor. And then there was the learning. Al-Hakam II, who ruled after his father, was a passionate patron of knowledge. he assembled one of the greatest libraries in the medieval world. The traditional accounts speak of a library containing around 400,000 volumes, and even if we treat that specific number with the caution a careful historian should, since medieval figures are often estimates, the essential truth stands. At a time when a large European monastery might treasure a few hundred books, Cordoba held libraries of staggering scale. Scholars were sent across the Islamic world to acquire manuscripts. Books of Greek philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and mathematics were gathered and translated into Arabic. This was part of a larger flowering. Al-Andalus, connected to the vast intellectual network of the Islamic world, became a bridge through which the knowledge of the ancient Greeks, much of it lost to Western Europe, was preserved, expanded, and eventually transmitted to the rest of the continent. In later centuries, scholars from Christian Europe would come to Spain specifically to translate these Arabic texts, and that flow of knowledge helped ignite the intellectual awakening that transformed Europe. Physicians in Al-Andalus advanced surgery and medicine. Astronomers refined their instruments and observations. Agriculture was revolutionized with new crops and irrigation techniques. Poetry, music, and architecture flourished. It was, in many ways, a golden age, but here is the tragic law of history that this story teaches so painfully. The higher a civilization climbs, the further it has to fall. And even at this peak of glory, the seeds of collapse were already being planted, because the very power of the caliphate depended on strong, capable rulers holding a diverse and ambitious society together. Remove that strong hand, and everything Abd al-Rahman had rebuilt could shatter. That is exactly what was about to happen, and the collapse, when it came, would be swift and brutal. Every golden age contains the beginning of its own end. The question is only whether anyone notices in time. After the death of Al-Hakam II in 976, the Caliphate of Córdoba passed to his young son, who was still a child. And when a child sits on a throne, real power flows to whoever stands behind it. That man was a brilliant, ruthless official who rose to dominate the state and effectively rule in the caliph's name. He is remembered in history by the title he took, Al-Mansur, the Victorious. He was a formidable military commander who launched dozens of devastating campaigns against the Christian kingdoms of the north, sacking cities and returning with plunder and captives. Under him, Al-Andalus reached the height of its military terror. He even raided the great Christian shrine of Santiago de Compostela. But Al-Mansur, for all his victories, had hollowed out the state from within. He had reduced the caliph to a powerless figurehead, sidelined the traditional structures of authority, and built his power on a military machine loyal to him personally rather than to the state. He also relied heavily on Berber soldiers imported from North Africa, deepening old ethnic tensions. When Al-Mansur died in 1002 and his sons proved unable to hold his system together, the whole structure came crashing down. What followed was a catastrophe known as the Fitna, a great civil war. Beginning around 1009, Al-Andalus tore itself apart. Rival factions, Berber troops, Arab nobles, and pretenders to the throne fought savagely for power. Cordoba, the jewel of Europe, was besieged, sacked, and devastated. The shining palace city of Madinat al-Zahra was looted and left in ruins, that wonder of the world, abandoned to decay less than a century after it was built. And the great library. In the chaos and the shifting of power, much of that priceless collection was scattered, sold, or destroyed. Centuries of gathered knowledge, dispersed. Even before the final civil war, portions had been purged for political and religious reasons. It is one of the great intellectual tragedies of history. In the year 1031, the Caliphate of Córdoba was formally abolished. The unified state that Abd al-Rahman II had founded and Abd al-Rahman III had raised to glory simply ceased to exist. And in its place arose chaos, dozens of small independent Muslim kingdoms called the Taifas. This is the great turning point of our story, so let me make it vivid. Picture a magnificent mirror, the unified, powerful Al-Andalus smashed onto stone. It shatters into dozens of glittering fragments. Each fragment is still beautiful. Each Taifa kingdom, Seville, Granada, Toledo, Zaragoza, and many more, became a center of culture, poetry, and refinement. Some of the finest poetry in the entire history of Al-Andalus was written in this Taifa period. On the surface, the fragments still shone. But a shattered mirror, however beautiful its pieces, can no longer reflect a whole image, and it cannot defend itself. The Taifa kings were divided, jealous, and constantly at war with each other. And to fight their fellow Muslim rivals, many of them did something that would prove fatal. They allied themselves with the Christian kingdoms of the north. They paid enormous tributes, protection money called parias, to Christian rulers in exchange for military support against other Muslim kings. Think about the horror of that. Muslim kings funding the armies of the very powers that dreamed of destroying Al-Andalus entirely, all so they could gain an advantage over their Muslim neighbors. The wealth of the south flowed north, filling the war chests of the Christian kingdoms and financing the armies that would one day consume them all. And the Christian kingdoms were growing stronger. In the north, the small states that had survived the original conquest, Castile, Leon, Aragon, and others, had never stopped pushing southward in what would later be called the Reconquista, the reconquest. Now, with the Muslim south fractured and paying them tribute, they smelled blood. In 1085, the unthinkable happened. The great city of Toledo, an ancient capital, a major center of Al-Andalus, fell to King Alfonso VI of Castile. It was the first major Muslim city to be permanently lost, and it sent a shockwave of terror through the entire Muslim south. Suddenly, the Taifa kings understood their peril. Divided, they could not stand against the rising Christian power. In desperation, they looked south across the strait to North Africa, where a fierce new Muslim power had arisen. A Berber movement of religious reformers and warriors called the Almoravids. The Taifa kings invited the Almoravids to come and defend Al-Andalus. It is said that one of the Taifa kings warned that inviting these fierce warriors might cost him his own throne, replied with words that have echoed through history, that he would rather be a camel herder in North Africa than a swineherd among the Christians. He would rather lose his kingdom to a fellow Muslim than to the enemy. The Almoravids crossed the strait. In 1086, they met the army of Alfonso VI and inflicted a crushing defeat on the Christians. Al-Andalus was saved for the moment, but the Almoravids looked at the Taifa kings, divided, tax-burdened, drinking wine, paying tribute to Christians, weak, and they were disgusted. Within a few years, they turned on the Taifa kings themselves, deposed them one by one, and absorbed Al-Andalus into their own North African empire. The pattern was set. When the Almoravids in turn grew weak and corrupt, a second wave of Taifa kingdoms emerged, and a second North African power, the Almohads, swept in during the 12th century to replace them, uniting Al-Andalus once more under a strict, powerful hand. For a time, under the Almohads, there was stability and even a resurgence of glory. But the underlying reality had not changed. The Christian kingdoms of the north were growing stronger and more unified with every passing decade. And the Muslim world in Spain, dependent on outside powers and torn by internal divisions, was slowly, inexorably losing ground. The end was coming, and its first great hammer blow would fall on a summer day in 1212 on a battlefield in the mountains, in a defeat so total that it would break the back of Muslim power in Spain forever. July 16th, 1212, a mountain pass in central Spain called Las Navas de Tolosa. For years, the Christian kingdoms had fought each other as much as they fought the Muslims. But now something changed. The Pope in Rome declared a crusade, and the rival Christian kings of the peninsula, Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and others, did something they rarely managed to do. they united. Facing them was the full might of the Almohad Caliphate, the North African power that then ruled Al-Andalus. The two great armies met at Las Navas de Tolosa, and when the fighting was over, the Almohad army had been shattered in a catastrophic, decisive defeat. This battle was the turning point of the entire 8th century struggle. After Las Navas de Tolosa, Almohad power in Spain collapsed. The unified Muslim defense of Al-Andalus was broken, and it would never truly recover. The floodgates opened. In the decades that followed, the great cities of Al-Andalus fell one after another, like dominoes, to the advancing Christian armies. Cordoba, the old capital, the city of the great mosque and the vanished libraries, fell in 1236. When it was taken, the great Mesquita, that breathtaking forest of arches, was converted into a cathedral. Seville, the largest and richest city of the south, fell in 1248. Valencia, Murcia, Jaén, one by one, the jewels of Al-Andalus passed into Christian hands. Within a few decades of Las Navas de Tolosa, almost the entire peninsula that Muslims had ruled for 500 years was gone. Almost. In the far south, sheltered by mountains, one Muslim kingdom survived, the Emirate of Granada. It was ruled by a dynasty called the Nasrids, and it endured by a combination of shrewd diplomacy, difficult terrain, and once again the paying of tribute, this time to the Christian kingdom of Castile, whose vassal Granada effectively became. For nearly 2.5 centuries, from the 1230s until 1492, Granada held on. It was the last light of Al-Andalus, and it was, in its final chapter, breathtakingly beautiful. For it was the Nasrid rulers of Granada who built the Alhambra. If you have ever seen photographs of it, you know why it takes the breath away. Perched on a hill above the city, the Alhambra is a palace fortress of impossible delicacy. Courtyards with still pools that mirror the sky, walls carved with lace-like patterns of plaster, ceilings that seem to drip with stone stalactites, gardens of fountains and running water, and everywhere carved into the walls in flowing Arabic script, a single phrase repeated thousands of times. Wala ghaliba illa Allah, and there is no victor except Allah. Read that again. In the last kingdom of Al-Andalus, in its final centuries, as the darkness closed in around it, the builders carved into their most beautiful creation the words, "There is no victor except Allah." It is one of the most poignant things in all of history. A dying civilization creating its most exquisite masterpiece and inscribing upon it a declaration of trust in Allah even as the end approached. But Granada was living on borrowed time, and in the 15th century, the borrowed time ran out. In 1469, two Christian monarchs married, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. Their marriage united the two most powerful Christian kingdoms of Spain into a single force, a force determined finally to erase the last Muslim state on the peninsula. History remembers them as the Catholic monarchs. And Granada, in its final years, did what Al-Andalus had done so many times before. With such tragic results, it turned on itself. A bitter civil war erupted within the royal family of Granada between the last emir, known to history as Boabdil, and his own relatives. Even as the Christian armies gathered at the gates, the Muslims of Granada were fighting each other. The final war for Granada began in the 1480s. City by city, fortress by fortress, the armies of Ferdinand and Isabella closed in. Malaga fell after a brutal siege, then the outlying territories. Finally, in 1491, they laid siege to the city of Granada itself. The end came on January 2nd, 1492. Boabdil, the last Muslim ruler in Spain, surrendered the keys of the city. He rode out of the Alhambra and handed over the last kingdom of Al-Andalus to Ferdinand and Isabella. Nearly 8 centuries after Tariq ibn Ziyad had crossed the strait, Muslim political rule in the Iberian Peninsula was over. There is a legend, and I must again be honest and tell you it is a later tradition, not firmly documented fact, that as Boabdil rode away into exile and paused on a hill for one last look at the city he had lost, he wept, and that his mother, watching him, said words that have echoed down the centuries. "You weep like a woman for what you could not defend like a man." The hill is still called in Spanish, the last sigh of the Moor. Whether or not those exact words were ever spoken, the grief they capture was real. And here is a detail of staggering historical weight. That same year, 1492, the year Granada fell, Ferdinand and Isabella funded a voyage by a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus. He set sail west across the Atlantic and reached the Americas. The very year that closed one of the great chapters of the medieval world opened the door to the modern one. But for the Muslims of Spain, 1492 was not the end of the story. In some ways, the most tragic chapter was only beginning. Because when Boabdil surrendered, the Treaty of Granada promised the Muslims who remained that they could keep their religion, their language, their customs, and their property. They were assured they could continue to live as Muslims under Christian rule. Those promises would be broken utterly and brutally. And what happened to the last Muslims of Spain over the following century is a story of forced conversion, betrayal, and finally, expulsion. A story that would end with an entire people driven from the land their ancestors had inhabited for 800 years. The promises made to the Muslims of Granada in 1492 lasted only a few years. At first, some tolerance was maintained, but soon the pressure to convert to Christianity began. Persuasion gave way to coercion. Then coercion gave way to force. Islamic books were seized and burned in the public squares of Granada, the same city that had once been a center of learning, now watching its heritage go up in flames. Practicing Islam openly was criminalized. By the early 1500s, the Muslims of Spain were given a devastating choice: convert to Christianity or leave. Many, especially the poor who could not afford to flee, converted, at least outwardly. These converts and their descendants came to be called the Moriscos. But conversion did not save them, because the authorities never truly trusted them. They suspected, often correctly, that many Moriscos still secretly practiced Islam behind closed doors, praying in secret, avoiding pork, washing their bodies, holding on to their faith in hidden ways while outwardly attending church. And so the Moriscos lived under constant suspicion and surveillance. Laws were passed forbidding Arabic language, Arabic names, traditional dress, and traditional customs. The Inquisition, the feared religious tribunal, investigated, tortured, and punished those suspected of secretly keeping their old faith. The tension exploded periodically into rebellion, most notably a major uprising in the mountains south of Granada in the late 1560s, which was crushed with tremendous bloodshed. The Moriscos of Granada were then forcibly scattered across other regions of Spain to break up their communities. And then came the final act. In 1609, King Philip III of Spain signed a decree of expulsion. Over the following years, from 1609 to 1614, an estimated 300,000 Moriscos, men, women, and children, most of whom had been born in Spain, whose families had lived there for many generations, were forcibly expelled from the country. They were marched to the ports and put on ships, sent mostly to North Africa, into an often hostile exile. Many died along the way. Many arrived in lands they had never known, treated as foreigners because they spoke Spanish and had Spanish customs. Think about the full arc of it: 8 centuries, a civilization that had built Cordoba and Granada, that had lit the lamps of learning when Europe was in darkness, that had produced philosophers and physicians and poets and the exquisite beauty of the Alhambra, reduced in the end to columns of frightened refugees on the roads, driven toward the sea, watched by soldiers, leaving behind everything their ancestors had built. By 1614, Al-Andalus was not merely conquered. It was, as a living Muslim society on Spanish soil, erased. Now let me address the title of this video honestly, as I promised I would. We speak of 800 years of Muslim rule in Spain. From the conquest in 711 to the fall of Granada in 1492 is about 781 years, close to 8 centuries, though not exactly. If you count all the way to the final expulsion of the Moriscos in 1609 to 1614, it is closer to 900 years of Muslim presence. So 800 years is a fair and widely used way to capture the span, as long as we understand it as a round figure and not a precise measurement. Truth matters, even in the small details. So what killed Al-Andalus? It is tempting to point to a single cause: the strength of the Christian kingdoms, or the crusading zeal of Ferdinand and Isabella, and those were real. But if you have followed this whole story, you have seen the deeper pattern with your own eyes, appearing again and again across the centuries. Disunity. At every critical moment, Al-Andalus was betrayed most of all by division within. The Caliphate of Córdoba did not fall to a foreign army. It tore itself apart in civil war. The Taifa kings did not merely lose to the Christians, they funded the Christian armies to fight each other, and they invited foreign powers who then devoured them. Granada, in its final hour, was consumed by a civil war within its own royal family, even as the enemy stood at the gates. The words carved thousands of times into the walls of the Alhambra were, "There is no victor except Allah." And yet the people who carved them so often behaved as though victory could be bought by allying with the enemy against their own brothers. This is not me imposing a modern lesson onto old events. It is the plain testimony of the history itself, and it echoes a principle stated clearly in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not dispute with one another, lest you lose courage and your strength depart. And be patient. Indeed, Allah is with the patient." Surah Al-Anfal 8:46. Lest your strength depart. Read the history of Al-Andalus, and you watch that verse play out over 800 years. Their strength departed the moment they turned on one another. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, "And hold firmly to the rope of Allah altogether, and do not become divided." Surah Al-Imran 3:103. Altogether. That was the one command Al-Andalus, for all its brilliance, could not sustain. So what remains today? The Alhambra still stands above Granada, drawing millions of visitors who walk through its courtyards in silent wonder. The great Mezquita of Cordoba still lifts its endless arches, now a cathedral, still carrying the fingerprints of the civilization that built it. Across Spain, the very language carries thousands of Arabic-rooted words. The place names, the architecture, the irrigation channels in the fields, the scholarship that flowed north and helped awaken Europe, all of it is a fingerprint that 8 centuries could not fully erase. Al-Andalus is gone, but it is not forgotten. It stands as one of the most remarkable civilizations of the medieval world, and as one of history's most sobering warnings. A warning that no golden age is guaranteed, that the highest civilizations can fall, that knowledge and beauty and power are not enough to save a people who forget to hold together. The believers who carved "There is no victor except Allah" into those walls were speaking a truth. The tragedy is how often they forgot to live by it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on the believers of Al-Andalus, teach us the lessons written in their rise and their fall, and unite the hearts of the Muslims, for their story tells us in stone and in blood exactly what happens when that unity is lost.